Armed robberies, home invasions, and escalating tensions spreading like wildfire through the once peaceful neighborhoods of Chicago. The culprit? A disturbing surge in migrant invasion of almost 64%, plunging Chicago into a crime nightmare unlike anything seen before. In the heart of Chicago, a troubling trend is emerging. A surge in crime that's shaking up communities. Imagine waking up to the news of home invasions, burglaries, and even confrontations with law enforcement becoming all too common. These incidents aren't isolated blips on the radar. They're forming a concerning pattern, leaving residents on edge and authorities scrambling for solutions. In neighborhoods once known for their sense of security, residents now find themselves locking their doors tighter and glancing nervously over their shoulders. Whether it's armed robberies in broad daylight or attempted break-ins caught on camera, the threat of crime looms large in Chicago's streets. As authorities go deeper into the root causes of the crime wave, a troubling pattern begins to emerge. Migrants from South America are increasingly implicated in organized crime activities. What's even more alarming is the level of sophistication these criminals exhibit. No longer are they just petty thieves. They're orchestrating complex schemes and executing daring heists with precision. From targeting upscale homes to large-scale thefts in shopping malls, these criminals are leaving no stone unturned in their pursuit of ill-gotten gains. Let's take a closer look at some specific incidents to understand the gravity of the situation. A woman in her backyard, her daughter just steps away, when armed robbers strike, holding a gun to her head. This is becoming a chilling reality for many Chicagoans. In another instance, a smoke shop on the city's northwest side falls victim to a burglary overnight. These are just a couple examples among many, each leaving its mark on the psyche of Chicago's residents. As Chicago grapples with its influx of criminal activity, one thing is clear: the impact extends far beyond the surface. It's not just about stolen possessions or damaged property. It's about the erosion of trust, the loss of security, and the collective trauma inflicted on a community under siege. So, does the government have anything to say about this? As Chicago faces mounting challenges from an escalating crime wave, all eyes turn to Mayor Brandon Johnson. Critics are questioning his leadership amidst rising crime rates, demanding answers and decisive action. It's a tough spot to be in for Mayor Johnson, with the spotlight shining brightly on him during these times. People are asking, what is the mayor doing to address the surge in crime? Is enough being done to protect the city's residents? With each passing day, the pressure on Mayor Johnson only seems to intensify, as Chicagoans grow increasingly frustrated with the lack of tangible progress.
Promising to align more than $2.2 billion through public and private funding.
We are taxpayers, we're property owners. Our money should go towards fixing our communities.
Which brings us to the former President Donald Trump, never one to shy away from voicing his opinions. He's been quick to criticize immigration policies, pointing fingers at the current administration for what he perceives as shortcomings in handling the migrant influx. From stricter border controls to comprehensive policy changes, Trump's calls for action echo across the political landscape. But it's not just about politics, it's about the impact on real people's lives. Trump's critique resonates with many who feel that the current approach to immigration is falling short, exacerbating issues like crime and strain on resources in cities like Chicago. Whether you agree with him or not, Trump's voice adds another layer to the national conversation surrounding immigration and its implications. Meanwhile, on the streets of Chicago, outrage simmers beneath the surface as residents voice their concerns loud and clear. There's a growing sense of frustration and disillusionment with what's perceived as the prioritization of migrants over citizens. From community meetings to street protests, people are making their voices heard, demanding accountability from their leaders. It's a delicate balancing act for Mayor Johnson and other officials, caught between the competing demands of public safety and humanitarian aid. As tensions rise and emotions run high, finding common ground becomes increasingly challenging. But in the midst of it all, one thing is clear: the people of Chicago are determined to hold their leaders accountable and fight for their city's future. And at the top is the whole housing situation. Shelters bursting at the seams, makeshift accommodations popping up on street corners, and families struggling to find a roof over their heads. That's the reality of the housing shortage gripping Chicago, as the migrant influx adds fuel to the fire. Shelters that were once a temporary refuge for the homeless are now overwhelmed, unable to accommodate the growing number of newcomers seeking shelter. With each passing day, the gap between supply and demand widens, leaving many families out in the cold.
We are going to forward folks because that's their final destination.
To Chicago. Similar to the ordinance passed there, those operating the bus could be fined $1,000 per passenger on top of other fines. They could also face impoundment.
Aurora is not in the position to be long-term care for anyone coming into the city.
In response, makeshift accommodations spring up, from tents pitched in parks to crowded rooms in rundown buildings. It's a desperate attempt to find shelter in the middle of a housing crisis that shows no signs of calming down. There's been an influx of almost 67%. But the housing shortage isn't just about a lack of roofs. It's also straining public services to the breaking point. Schools are now being repurposed as emergency accommodations for migrants. Police stations, never intended to house families, are overflowing with those in need of shelter. The ripple effects are felt across the city, as resources are diverted from their intended purposes to address the immediate needs of the housing crisis. It's a delicate balancing act for city officials, as they try to meet the demands of both residents and newcomers alike. But as schools become shelters and police stations become makeshift homes, questions arise about the long-term impact on education, public safety, and the overall well-being of the community. It's a precarious situation with no easy answers. As if the strain on public services wasn't enough, the housing crisis is also exacting a heavy toll on the city's economy. Exorbitant costs and resource allocation challenges only exacerbate the situation, making it even harder for Chicago to weather the storm. From the skyrocketing price of rental properties to the increased demand for social services, the economic strain is felt at every level of society. It's a reminder of the interconnectedness of housing, economics, and social policy, and the delicate balance that must be struck to ensure the well-being of all residents. But are there any implications in place? Chicago's housing crisis and rising crime rates are not isolated incidents. Similar challenges are cropping up in cities across the country, prompting a moment of introspection on a national scale. Take New York, for example, where shelters are at capacity and resources are stretched thin. The parallels between these urban centers highlight the interconnectedness of social issues and the need for comprehensive solutions. As cities grapple with the impact of migration on their communities, conversations about immigration policy and reform take center stage. Calls for stricter border control and comprehensive policy changes echo across the political spectrum. From tightening security measures to overhauling the immigration system, the debate is heated and multifaceted. Critics argue that lax border enforcement and outdated policies have contributed to the current crisis, while proponents of reform emphasize the need for compassion and humanity in addressing the root causes of migration.
Black migrants say they're facing. In our series, we featured the voice of activist Adama Ba because she's helping countless Black migrants in New York City daily.
This is a safe place.
She was among those at the table today.
To hold the mayor's office accountable.
This invisible population that actually has been ignored.
Outside City Hall before the hearing, asylum seekers and those helping them during this migrant crisis came out to stand up.
No hate, no fear. Immigrants are welcome here.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers, but one thing is clear: the status quo is no longer sustainable. As cities like Chicago and New York struggle to cope with the influx of migrants, the urgency for meaningful reform grows stronger by the day. At both the local and federal levels, leaders are under scrutiny for their responses to the crisis. From Mayor Brandon Johnson in Chicago to policymakers in Washington, D.C., the pressure is on to deliver results and alleviate the strain on communities. But are their actions effective? That's the question on everyone's minds as they analyze leadership responses and policy decisions. Are resources being allocated appropriately? Is there coordination between local and federal agencies? These are the critical questions that demand answers as cities navigate this turbulent period. As the debate rages on, the future of immigration policy in America hangs in the balance. How we address the challenges facing cities like Chicago and New York will shape the direction of policy for years to come, making it imperative that we find common ground and work together to find solutions that benefit all residents. Which brings us to the proposed solutions by officials. When it comes to addressing the challenges posed by the migrant influx, one strategy that often enters the conversation is closing the borders. But while it may seem like a straightforward solution, the reality is far more complex. Closing the borders raises a host of considerations and controversies. On one hand, proponents argue that stricter border controls are necessary to stem the flow of newcomers and relieve pressure on cities like Chicago. They point to concerns about national security and the strain on resources as justification for tightening restrictions. On the other hand, opponents warn of the humanitarian consequences of closing the borders. Moreover, they emphasize the need for a more nuanced approach that addresses the root causes of migration, rather than simply shutting people out. It's a contentious issue, with no easy answers. Closing the borders is just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to tackling the migrant crisis. Another avenue for addressing the challenges posed by the migrant influx lies in financial strategies. This involves the reallocation of budgets and bolstering of support systems to better meet the needs of both residents and newcomers. By reallocating resources to areas most affected by the crisis, cities like Chicago can ensure that essential services like housing, education, and public safety are adequately funded. This may involve making tough decisions about where to allocate limited resources, but it's a necessary step in addressing the immediate needs of the community. Additionally, bolstering support systems can help ease the strain on both residents and newcomers. By investing in programs that provide assistance with housing, employment, and language training, cities can help migrants integrate more smoothly into their new communities, while also supporting existing residents. Lastly, integration efforts play a crucial role in seeking solutions to the migrant crisis. This involves implementing programs and initiatives aimed at helping migrants become active and contributing members of society. Employment programs, for example, can provide migrants with the skills and resources they need to find meaningful work and support themselves and their families. Language training programs can help bridge the communication gap and facilitate better integration into the community. But integration efforts go beyond just finding jobs and learning the language. They also involve strengthening community ties and fostering a sense of belonging. This may include initiatives like community events, cultural exchanges, and volunteer opportunities that bring residents together and promote understanding and cooperation. In the end, seeking solutions to the migrant crisis requires a multifaceted approach that addresses the complex issues at play. By considering strategies like closing the borders, implementing financial strategies, and prioritizing integration efforts, cities like Chicago can work towards building stronger, more resilient communities for all residents. The migrant invasion crisis in Chicago has sparked a range of reactions within the community, from protests to expressions of public outrage. Many residents feel deeply concerned about the impact of the influx of migrants on their neighborhoods, safety, and quality of life. Some community members have taken to the streets in protest, demanding action from local and federal authorities to address the crisis. These protests often highlight concerns about public safety, strained resources, and perceived failures in immigration policies. Public outrage has also been evident in discussions on social media, with residents expressing frustration, fear, and anger over the situation. Stories of migrant-involved crimes, overcrowded shelters, and strained public services have fueled these sentiments, amplifying calls for urgent solutions. The migrant invasion crisis has had significant implications for social cohesion and community relations in Chicago. Tensions have arisen between different segments of the population, including longtime residents and newly arrived migrants. Some residents feel resentful towards migrants, viewing them as a burden on resources and a threat to their safety. This has strained relations within communities, leading to divisions and mistrust. Additionally, concerns about the city's response to the crisis have led to heightened political polarization, with debates often devolving into partisan rhetoric. This polarization further erodes trust and undermines efforts to find collaborative solutions. Despite the challenges, there have been efforts within the community to bridge divides and foster understanding amidst tensions. Community organizations, religious groups, and grassroots initiatives have stepped up to facilitate dialogue and promote empathy. These efforts often focus on humanizing the experiences of migrants and fostering connections between different groups within the community. Through storytelling, cultural exchange events, and mutual aid projects, residents are finding common ground and building solidarity. Additionally, local leaders and elected officials have a role to play in promoting unity and addressing the concerns of all residents. By engaging in constructive dialogue, listening to community feedback, and prioritizing inclusive policies, they can help heal divisions and rebuild trust. To tackle the migrant invasion crisis in Chicago effectively, it's essential to address its root causes. One key aspect is understanding why migrants are drawn to the city in the first place. Economic opportunities, safety concerns in their home countries, and the perception of sanctuary in Chicago are some driving factors. To address these root causes, initiatives focusing on economic development and security in migrants' countries of origin are crucial. This could involve investing in job creation, education, and infrastructure in those regions to provide alternatives to migration. Additionally, diplomatic efforts to address issues contributing to instability and insecurity in source countries are necessary. Furthermore, addressing the misinformation and false promises that often lure migrants to Chicago is essential. Public awareness campaigns highlighting the realities of life in the city, as well as the legal implications of unauthorized migration, can help dispel misconceptions and discourage risky journeys. Comprehensive immigration reform is vital for addressing the migrant invasion crisis in Chicago and beyond. This reform should prioritize creating a fair, efficient, and humane immigration system that balances security concerns with compassion and respect for human rights. One crucial aspect of reform is enhancing legal pathways for migration. Simplifying and expediting visa processes for work, family reunification, and asylum can reduce the incentive for migrants to resort to illegal means of entry. Additionally, providing a pathway to legal status for undocumented migrants already residing in the country can contribute to stability and integration. Alongside legal reforms, policy changes could prioritize addressing the factors driving irregular migration, such as poverty, violence, and lack of opportunities in migrants' home countries. This may involve implementing targeted aid programs, addressing regional disparities, and promoting good governance and rule of law abroad. What are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.